How can idealism beat materialism? It certainly can't do it by retreading the past. Why did materialism decisively beat idealism in the first place and become the dominant intellectual paradigm? It was for one reason alone. Materialism was mathematized and idealism wasn't. Materialism was made quantitative, idealism wasn't. Materialism could be measured. Idealism couldn't. Equations could be applied to materialism. None could be applied to idealism. Predictions could be made using materialism, but not with idealism. All of that gives materialism a decisive advantage. The last thing idealism should do is try to ignore all of this. Yet that's exactly what Bernardo Kastrup, one of the most prominent idealists today, has done. He has dug up Schopenhauer's philosophy from the grave, a rather unproductive maneuver, one might think, given that Schopenhauer's philosophy was never a dominant system even in Schopenhauer's own time. Hegel was a far more successful idealist than Schopenhauer, and Marx became successful by casting Hegel's system in materialist terms, albeit not scientific materialist terms. If you're going to resurrect idealism, it had better be for a good reason, and, above all, because you have found a way for it to compete with and defeat scientific materialism. Kastrup hasn't come up with anything that could possibly challenge science. By following Schopenhauer, he has committed himself to an unknown and unknowable noumenon, thing in itself, an instant and automatic fail. Here's lesson 1 in philosophy. You must be able to define what existence is. If you can't, you're going nowhere. You are commencing from an irresolvable mystery, and what's for sure is that you are not going to be making any rational and logical arguments. In fact, you don't know what you're talking about and will never know what you're talking about because you can't define what you're talking about. Unless you can define what existence is made of and thus what its properties are, you've got nothing. You're just making it up. You're speculating. You're guessing. Science can't define what anything is, but it doesn't care because it uses a different approach. It measures things. When Einstein was asked what time is, he didn't define time. No scientist ever has or ever will. He said, time is what you measure with a clock. Yes, and temperature is what you measure with a thermometer and weight is what you measure with a weighing machine, and so on. You can create a world of instruments and measurements and do very well, as science shows. But you're still no further forward in explaining what reality is. It's literally impossible for science to define existence. Its method and modus operandi are entirely useless in this regard. Defining things isn't what science does. Measuring things is what science does. Science is a set of interconnected measurements, united via mathematical equations. And that works really well for all sorts of practical things in the world, but certainly not for revealing anything at all about the nature of reality. You can't measure purpose in science. You can't measure meaning. You can't measure the point of it all. You can't measure the unconscious, you can't measure consciousness, and you can't measure subjectivity and free will. You can't measure what came before the Big Bang. You can't measure the eternal and necessary order. You can't measure basis existence. You can't even observe it. Idealism could conceivably do all of that, but not via Schopenhauer's philosophy, or Kastrup's upgrade of that, or any other such undertaking. The only way forward with idealism is to confer on it the same gift that was given to science, and that is to mathematize it. It was easy to mathematize matter, extended stuff with measurable weight, volume, temperature, density, direction, speed, and so on. But how do you apply mathematics to unextended, dimensionless mind? Leibniz was a brilliant mathematician, philosopher, and logician. He took Descartes' dualistic system where mind was unextended and matter extended and turned it into an idealistic system based on unextended minds only, which he called monads. Matter was derived from these. It wasn't separate from them. Leibniz treated monads as metaphysical singularities, but his system couldn't compete with Newtonian physics, even though it was much more logical. Newton introduced an immensely successful and predictive mathematical physics. Leibniz was enormously closer to explaining what existence actually is, but without any mathematics. He couldn't compete with Newton, and intellectual history followed Newton and ignored Leibniz. That was a decisive moment in intellectual history. The right idealist answer to existence, Leibniz's, withered on the vine, while Newton's wrong materialist answer prospered incredibly. Newton's seminal work was called Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. This has been called the greatest scientific work in history. Pierre-Simon Laplace said, "The Principia is pre-eminent above any other production of human genius." Mathematical physicist Alexis Clairaut said, "The famous book of mathematical principles of natural philosophy marked the epoch of a great revolution in physics. The method followed by its illustrious author Sir Newton spread the light of mathematics on a science which up to then had remained in the darkness of conjectures and hypotheses. Idealism remained in the darkness of conjectures and hypotheses. It never came up with an equivalent book, the mathematical principles of metaphysics, or the mathematical principles of mind. Well, actually, it did. The Pythagorean Illuminatikoi secretly developed an entire mathematical system devoted to the mathematization of idealism. Leibniz devised a system of nothing but minds. He called these monads, units. Mind atoms, we might say. Atoms of atomic number 0, and 0 mass. Immaterial atoms. Atoms outside space and time. Atoms of pure light. Light is immaterial, massless and outside space and time since it is maximally length contracted and time dilated. What is a mind? It's a full electromagnetic spectrum. To be more exact, and more mathematical, it's a full collection of sine and cosine basis waves. We can refer to these as sinusoids, or frequencies. And this is all we need to define reality and create the material universe of space and time. It really is. All monads exist together as a mental singularity, a frequency domain. This is an unextended, dimensionless domain prior to mass, matter, space and time. The mind singularity creates the extended Cartesian domain of matter via the mathematical formalism of Fourier mathematics. A frequency domain of mind generates a spacetime domain of matter, and then the two domains exchange information via forward and inverse Fourier transforms. This thus transitions from an intractable Cartesian dualism to a smooth-running mathematical monism, based on eternal and necessary light. Light, or rather sinusoids, is what existence is. Light is the carrier of mind. Light is the absolute. Nothing can go faster than light. Light is outside the material order of mass and extension. The spacetime universe of matter is a relative condition that exists within the mental singularity as an internal hologram, that we perceive as absolutely solid. Light creates matter through sinusoidal phase relations. It's all in the math. So, of what use is Bernardo Kastrup's take on Schopenhauer's philosophy? That is no way forward for idealism. Idealism must be Leibnizian and strictly mathematical. Elements of Hegelianism can be added. Schopenhauer has relatively little to contribute. Nietzsche's will to power as opposed to Schopenhauer's will to live is something that can certainly be added to the mix. Those who support idealism must move on from the likes of Schopenhauer and Kastrup and any suggestion that consciousness is responsible for existence. It's not. Mind is. And mind's default mode in our universe is unconscious. Consciousness is generated from the unconscious strictly via one process, the acquisition of language, and how this transforms our internal operating system based on instincts into a new and much more powerful operating system based on conceptual language, by which we can understand reality rather than simply perceive it. Idealism is having no favors done for it by some of its most prominent exponents. Only mathematical idealism and rationalism is the way forward. Only that can defeat scientific materialism and empiricism. It's time to move past the likes of Kastrup. His system cannot dent materialism at all, just as Schopenhauer's didn't. Mathematics is the key to mind, subjectivity, the unconscious, consciousness and free will. Mathematics made physics what it is, and now it can do an even better job for metaphysics, via which we can replace matter with mind.